This album is, I think, the natural progression from the last two, but I also think that we took some steps to make it, you know, hopefully a growth rather than just kind of a regurgitation of the other stuff that we've done. But we worked with Shakir King, who produced it, and he's worked on some of my favorite records in the world. And when me and him first sat down, the thing that we talked about the most was trying to make it not necessarily a country album. You know, I'm from Houston, so the way that I sing and the way that we play is kind of unavoidably country in some ways, but we didn't want to go too far in that direction intentionally. We wanted to kind of highlight some of the more pop influences and rock and jazz and fusion elements that we all listen to. So Paul Simon's my hero, or one of my heroes, and a huge inspiration for this record in particular. He consistently, I think, has been one of the best songwriters and one of the most experimental and exploratory musicians genre-wise. You know, every record is completely different from the one before it. So I kind of look to him as what I could hope to achieve with my career, you know, not being really pinned down by any one thing, but still being massively successful. I wanted to, in some ways, give the listener of this record some context, because the last record was so country and so obviously steeped in tradition, classic country tradition. And so I feel like if you listen to something and you have the word George Jones in your head, you're going to hear it differently than if you listen to something and you have Paul Simon in your head. So that was part of the reason for putting this song on the record, is hopefully to give people some context and let them know where we're coming from and what we want. I don't really want to have to always tap into my own experience to write, you know. That's why guys like Randy Newman and Paul Simon are really important to me, because it feels like I could theoretically have a pretty good life and still write meaningful songs, you know? Yeah, I never want to believe that, like, you have to be this completely screwed up dude to write good songs. Yeah, I guess that is kind of the bad part of making art in some ways, is you can never be too honest. I mean, I guess you can, you just have to accept the consequences. But the fortunate thing about my process and my writing is, like I said, it's not all completely autobiographical. So even though that one is pretty autobiographical, I definitely embellish, and I definitely take the characters further than maybe I would want to go in reality, down into despair and destruction, you know? And so I think the people in my life know that, and they know that I'm a fairly well-balanced human, and I'm not, you know, drinking myself to death or anything like that. So I think they can kind of read between the lines and see where things fall into narrative and fall into imagination, and where things might, you know, intersect into reality. Let's put it this way, I want to be honest in all elements of my life, and if anyone has a problem with that, then we probably aren't going to be close anyway, you know? I was talking with my buddy Corey Chisel. We were in Australia together recently, and I was going through kind of a rough, just weird emotional time, and you know, the way I've always dealt with that since I was a little kid was writing. And the really interesting thing about it is sometimes when I'm really confused or really unhappy and I sit down to write, there's almost like this other voice that's coming through and kind of giving me answers. Or it's like something about the narrative quality to songwriting allows you to remove yourself emotionally a little bit. And it's like there's this subconscious part of you that's coming through and saying, this is how you feel about things, rather than, you know, just the way that you feel. You know, you can kind of see through the emotional parts when you're writing. And for me, it's like I can go from being super confused, and then 3 hours later, after I've written a song, I like have this great clarity, or at least I feel like if I am confused, I've kind of like quantified that and like solidified that, and I'm okay with it or something, you know. It's very therapeutic and very helpful. And what we were talking about is, I can't imagine not having that in some ways. Like I don't know what it would be like to just live with those feelings and not have a way to escape them or deal with them, you know? I guess all art is like that. You know, you can kind of take something bad or good or whatever and then create something and then look at that and say, oh, well, at least this came out of it. You know, like, even if it's terrible.